I guess what I'm asking here is domestically, how does that change like our midterm and presidential elections?
Oh, you mean here?
Yeah. Does that make it favorable for the incumbent conservative Republican Party, or does that make it favorable for the Democrat
Well,
Party?
no. So right now, in the current trends, what you're seeing is Trump is clearly to blame for starting the war inside of the American public, and that's why he's lost. He already lost the support of the Democrats, but he's lost support among almost all the independents, and even probably about 15 or 20% of the Republicans now are saying he's doing a bad job. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote Democrat because right now, this is all being judged based on the consequences of the Iran war. When we get to the midterms, you can absolutely, and you already see this, and I was already telling my class to expect this. What Trump is going to do is he is going, as the closer we get to the midterms, he's going back to the social issues. He got elected on social issues big time. Remember the immigrant issue, the trans issue. He's going to remind everybody why they voted for him in droves over Kamala Harris, and he legitimately won in 2024. It wasn't a he didn't hoodwink anybody. So that he will undoubtedly come back to that strategy, and it's already occurring here. So the what looks like a gigantic tidal wave of support for the Democrats here is probably more of a mirage at the moment. Now, that said, if the economy, as I'm saying, is going to continue to go south here, this will work to his political disadvantage. So, and we get into the midterms here. Now, what you have, Jack, is my nightmare scenario. This is something I worried about several years ago, and it's where you have a gigantic international crisis that's really hurting America at home, in addition to the political crisis that we've been facing for the last 5 years. For 5 years, we've been in an era I call the era of violent populism. This is, you've seen the rise of political violence on the right, on the left. You've seen January 6th on the right during the George Floyd protests. 5 to 7% of the George Floyd protests were violent. To this day, you can go into downtown Chicago and you'll find Water Tower Place is still not open. That was that's where Oprah had her apartment at the top. They're only now talking about maybe bringing it back in 2028 here. So the consequences of all of that violence here, which I'm saying it was only 5 to 7% of the protests were violent, but that's 600 protests were violent because it was such a massive situation. Well, that was on, and then we had lower level of violence, of course, the campus protests that happened after October 7th here. So that was another wave of this era of violent populism. So we've had for 5 years now this rising political violence, lone wolf and collective political violence. You've had the rising normalization of political violence. I track this in these national opinion surveys we do at my center, the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats here. And so now what you're seeing in the fall, these lines are crossing. These lines are literally crossing. And they're happening not 5 years from now, they're going to happen in these midterms. So I think these midterms and also probably 2028, what we're coming to are the most dangerous elections in our lifetime. And my lifetime is a lot longer than your lifetime. So I mean, my lifetime here. This is really with the Iraq, with the Iran war, you're bringing these two things together in ways we haven't seen since the 60s. The last time we had this, hugely unpopular war and this domestic chaos was the 1960s. And that was also a string of political assassinations and so forth. And
Do political assassinations typically bode well for the incumbent party or the opposition party?
well, normally the assassinations I would say normally in a time not of violent populism. So we're in a specific era, Jack. But if you think about the assassinations that occur outside of that, say 1981, Hinckley, a guy by the name of Hinckley, tries to assassinate Ronald Reagan. Well, that's pretty clearly a one-off. There's not there. This was a good period of time after the 1960s, so it's essentially an isolated event. And what it does is it actually brought a lot of sympathy for Reagan in the short term. It didn't really last a long time politically because nothing, if it's just a one off event, nothing really lasts very long in our country. Politics just on too many big things here. So it normally politically doesn't really matter. It will matter for a few days when they're one off events.
I guess when you think of JFK and like the Lyndon B. Johnson was brought into
JFK
office.
was in 63, so this is the early part of the 60s era violent populism really gets going a few years later. So when JFK is assassinated, it's essentially a one-off as people felt it at the time. Now, in hindsight, you can see it as part of maybe a connected, but it's too early in the process to be viewed as part of an era or a hinge event of a new era. The truth is, it was a period of pretty great sympathy across the country, and it was viewed again as a one off, an exceptional event. Compare that to the assassination of Martin Luther King. This happens in early April 1968. This is happening after a whole string of violence had happened in our country. You have riots in cities, you have anti-war violence going on. So the second half of the 1960s is not like the first half of the 1960s. The second half of the 1960s is essentially an era of violent popular. I have a whole chapter on this in the book I have coming out in a few months here. It's called Our Own Worst Enemies here. Anyway, and what you see there is a completely different set of reactions. So when Martin Luther King is assassinated in Chicago, which is 500 miles away from where King was assassinated, you have a whole 2 mile strip of downtown Chicago literally burned to the ground. Literally burned to the ground. It was 2 miles of a smoking ruin. And that was because of the reaction to Martin Luther King's assassination. Well, you didn't see anything like that with JFK. You see, if anything, there was a reaction. It was positive. It wasn't because JFK was a Democrat here. It's just because we were in an era where public support for political violence hadn't yet occurred. It will occur a few years later in the 60s, and that changes everything. Once you have tens of millions of Americans support political violence for their own political goals, that changes everything about political violence. It's not just about militia groups anymore. It's not just about a lone wolf. The lone wolf has an enormous incentive to commit violence once there's tens of millions who he can look to as people who will support him, endorse him. Today, on top of the tens of millions, we have social media where you can see almost instantly the support for political violence. Um, uh, it just happens, and that motivates the would-be lone wolves to do even more.